Hello yet again. The human condition is essentially the riddle of why humans are competitive and aggressive when the ideals of life are to be cooperative and loving. However, it needs to be emphasised that the deeper meaning of the human condition is more elusive. Indeed, the human condition has been such an unbearable issue for humans to think about and confront that many people now have very little idea of what the human condition actually is, thinking it refers not to the reality of our species' agonisingly troubled psychology, but the state of widespread poverty and physical hardship in human life, or to problems such as human inequality. But these issues are only manifestations and aspects of the human condition. The truth is, the human condition is a much more profound and serious issue that goes to the very heart of who we are. A quick summary of what's been explained so far in this series will reveal what the human condition really is and show how it's solved. In the first video of this series, I briefly introduced the overall situation that this video 10 and the next video 11 will deal with, which is that while the all-relieving explanation of the human condition has finally been found, virtually everyone has been living in such fear of the human condition that they'll find they can't access that wonderful, life-transforming and world-saving explanation. But I then explained that there is a way to overcome this death effect impasse, which is that with patient perseverance, the reassuring logic of the explanation will start to ease your subconscious fear of the subject. And before long, you'll find you can actually take in or hear what's being said, and by so doing, access the fabulous transforming benefits of being able to understand the human condition. In the second video of this series, I explained that while everyone uses the excuse that our competitive and aggressive behaviour is due to us having savage animal instincts which are supposedly driven by our need to reproduce our genes, really this is just a convenient excuse while we search for the real reason for our divisive nature. I mean, after all, words used to describe human behaviour, such as egocentric, arrogant, inspired, depressed, deluded, pessimistic, optimistic, hateful, cynical, immoral, brilliant, guilt-ridden, evil, psychotic, neurotic, all recognise the involvement of our species' fully conscious thinking mind. They demonstrate that there's a psychological dimension to our behaviour, that we don't suffer from a genetic opportunism-driven animal condition, but the psychologically troubled human condition. Also, we humans have cooperative and loving moral instincts, the voice or expression of which we call our conscience, which is the opposite of competitive and aggressive instincts. I mean, as Charles Darwin said, the moral sense affords the best and highest distinction between man and the lower animals. So saying a behaviour results from having competitive and aggressive instincts like other animals is simply not true. As I say, it's just a convenient excuse while we waited for the psychosis acknowledging and solving real explanation of our divisive nature. And in the third video and essay of this series, I presented that psychosis acknowledging and solving fully accountable, real explanation of our divisive and competitive and aggressive human condition, which is that when our fully conscious mind emerged, our hardwired, ignorant, dictatorial instincts unjustly condemned its search for knowledge, unavoidably causing the retaliatory and defensive, angry, egocentric and alienated state of the human condition to emerge. Yeah, while we couldn't defend ourselves with understanding, all we could do was angrily defy the criticism, egocentrically try to prove we didn't deserve it by winning as much power and fame, fortune and glory as we could, and by blocking out the criticism out of our mind. We became sufferers of the psychologically upset, angry, egocentric and alienated human condition. Then, in the fourth video and essay of the series, I provided evidence from many great thinkers that this instinct versus intellect explanation of the human condition is the real reason for our divisive condition. Such thinkers included Moses and Hesiod and Plato from ancient times, Murray, Van der Post, Rousseau, Burdyev, Newman, MacLean and Kessler from contemporary times. Now, most significantly in terms of understanding what the human condition really is, what I emphasised in that fourth video and essay is just how ashamed and guilt-ridden our conscious thinking self has been for having corrupted our wonderfully cooperative and loving, Edenic, moral, instinctive self or soul. I said that to fully appreciate the agony of the human condition, we need to immerse ourselves in the absolute horror of our predicament. Since we did once live cooperatively and lovingly, as the great thinkers recognised we did, and I might mention that Freedom Essay 21 explains how our distant ape ancestors came to live cooperatively and lovingly, then how appalled by our corrupted state have we been? Because the question absolutely screaming out to be answered is, why on earth would we have been so seemingly stupid to have departed from such a wonderful, gentle and peaceful way of living and become brutally aggressive warmongers and egomaniacal competitors and psychotic and neurotic mad people? How are we to explain our species' so-called fall from grace? Why did we corrupt our original, all-loving and all-sensitive, moral, instinctive self or soul? Why did we destroy paradise, turn utopia into dystopia? I mean, that's been our terrible predicament or condition. How on earth could we explain and justify that seeming act of madness? We surely must be evil monsters. I then said that trying to live with the implication that we are despicable, evil, worthless, utopia-destroying monsters has to have been absolutely unbearable. And to cope with that diabolical situation, we had no choice but to adopt the patently dishonest savage instincts excuse while we waited for the real explanation to be found. We deluded ourselves that other animals constantly compete and fight with each other in an effort to make sure they reproduce their genes, and that's what our forebears did. And so that's where our brutal, competitive and aggressive nature comes from, which we being our conscious self, supposedly have to spend our whole lives trying to control. Now, this is all a complete reverse of the truth lie, because it's our instincts that are loving and seemingly good, not aggressive and seemingly bad. And it's our conscious mind that has been the corrupting, seemingly bad influence, not the controlling, seemingly good influence. I mean, what a get-out-of-jail-free card, but what an absolute lie. But as I said, until science revealed the difference between instinctive orientations and conscious understandings, that we finally been allowed us to explain the real reason for our competitive and aggressive behaviour, we had no ability to explain ourselves, and therefore no choice but to deny that we have cooperative and loving heritage and instead believe that the lie that our distant ancestors were brutally aggressive savages. And of course, we also had no choice but to live a retaliatory and defensive, angry, egocentric and alienated existence. In the fifth video and essay of the series, Tony Gowing then described how now that we have found the real defence for our competitive and aggressive behaviour, all the old artificial ways of defending ourselves are obsoleted. We no longer have to live a defensive and retaliatory, egocentric and aggressive existence, or live a dishonest, alienating life of denying truth. Every human can now be transformed from a horrible, human condition-stricken existence to a fabulous human condition-free life. As Tony said,
we don't have to be ashamed. We don't have to shake our fists at the heavens anymore and prove to everyone and everything that they've been wrong about us. First principle science has proven that we are worthwhile, glorious, heroic beings. It had to be the way it's been. There was no other way, but it's all over. The relief of finally being able to understand floods through our whole being. The anger and frustration just dissipates. All the bullshit, the falseness and the lies end. we can finally love ourselves and participate in the world instead of constantly fighting it. No longer preoccupied with proving our self-worth, we will finally have the room in ourselves to properly help others, to selflessly participate in stopping the suffering everywhere we look.
Tony's absolutely right. Until we found the real explanation for the human condition, the only way we could deal with our immense insecurity about our worthiness was by pursuing the artificial and materialistic forms of reinforcement, of seeking power, fame, fortune and glory. But now that we have found the real defence for ourselves, all that artificial forms of reinforcement are obsolete, no longer necessary. And the whole human race is transformed. Redemption and rehabilitation comes to humankind. I might mention here that the millennial generation is the product of so much psychological exhaustion from humanity's now 2 million year long heroic but immensely upsetting search for understanding, ultimately for understanding of the human condition, that a great many of them are voting to just dogmatically impose a socialistic, cooperative and loving world as the only solution they have to try to counter all the upset in themselves and in the world. But dogma is the opposite of knowledge, which means that dogma for conscious thinking humans can't work, and it never has. However, as has just been explained, now that the search for knowledge has finally found the ultimate knowledge of understanding of the human condition, the whole competitive and aggressive way of living is actually obsoleted now, bringing about the transformed world millennials so desperately desire. So, while their extreme psychosis makes it almost impossible for them to read all this confronting analysis of the human condition, millennials are the generation that will rejoice most that this fabulous breakthrough has occurred. I talk much more about the difficulty of reading about the human condition in the next video, which is video 11, and about the particular difficulty millennials have with trying to read about this information in Freedom Essay 55. In terms of revealing what the human condition really is, the key points in the summary I've just given are firstly, that has been our terrible predicament. How on earth could we explain and justify that semi-active madness of destroying the cooperative and loving world of our instinctive soul? We surely must be evil monsters. And then until science revealed the difference between instinctive orientations and conscious understandings, we had no ability to explain ourselves, which left us no choice but to believe in the savage instincts excuse and to live a retaliatory and defensive, angry, egocentric and alienated existence. Yes, the psychological impact of not being able to explain and understand why the human race became a fallen, corrupted, brutally competitive and aggressive selfish species has been colossal. In fact, most of human behaviour now is driven by, and most of our personalities are a direct result of, our inability to understand and know whether we are evil monsters or not. That is the absolute bottom line truth about our lives. That virtually all our behaviour has been based on an immense uncertainty and insecurity about our fundamental goodness and worth and meaningfulness. As the explanation of the human condition in the third video and essay of this series finally explains, trying to keep at bay that dark shadow of our horrifically corrupted, guilt-stricken condition by constantly seeking validation of ourselves and constantly blocking out and if necessary, attacking any criticism of our sense of goodness, worth and meaning, is why we are an immensely egocentric, alienated and angry species. The reality absolutely is that we humans have been so insecure, we have spent our whole lives propping up our sense of worthiness, resisting any implication that we aren't good people. Indeed, our insecurity about our worthiness or otherwise has so preoccupied our lives that we've almost completely lost access to the all-sensitive and all-loving instinctive soul within us. Our original instinctive self or soul has died away because of our preoccupation with trying to validate ourselves, establish that we're good and not bad. In fact, as has been emphasised, we actively repress the memory of our species' innocent time in the Garden of Eden because that memory only compounded our sense of insecurity, guilt and damnation. I mean, not only have we repressed the memory of our species' time in innocence, we also repressed the whole unbearably depressing issue of the human condition itself. We've had no desire at all to be reminded of our species' past time in innocence and the unbearable issue it raised of our horrifically corrupted human condition. I mean, why go on such a suicidally depressing guilt trip? So yes, the psychologist Carl Jung wasn't exaggerating at all when he wrote that when it, our shadow, which is the brutally competitive and aggressive darker aspects of our corrupted condition, appears, it is quite within the bounds of possibility for man to recognise the relative evil of his nature. But it is a rare and shattering experience for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil. Yes, the face of absolute evil has been the shattering possibility that we humans really are just a cancerous blight on this planet. And to cope with that possibility, our only way to survive was to block out the whole unbearable issue of our corrupted, soul-destroyed, Garden of Eden, devastating human condition. Yes, the truth absolutely is that the distress of our condition has been so great that we humans not only had to repress the memory of our species' innocent past, we learned to repress the whole shattering issue of our corrupted, fallen, seemingly evil state or condition. Since we aren't born denying the issue of the human condition, we obviously had to learn to do that. And that was a torturous education that occurred during the early years of our adolescence, when at around the age of 12, we first started thinking deeply about the seeming wrongness of human behaviour, including our own. And the inability to explain and understand the human condition meant that the more we thought about the subject, the more depressed our thinking became. And in the end, when we reached the age of around 14, our thinking typically became so suicidally depressed that we realised we had no choice but to resign ourselves to blocking out from our mind the whole unbearable issue of our seemingly horrifically flawed state or condition. Now, this agonising process of resignation to living in denial of the issue of the human condition that virtually every human had to go through while there was no truthful understanding of the human condition is described in some detail in Freedom Essay 30. While resigned adults living in denial of the human condition typically blame the teen angst that adolescents experience on the hormonal upheaval of puberty, the so-called puberty blues, the real reason for their distress is that they are thinking truthfully about the human condition, including its manifestation in themselves. Now, this picture amongst the ones I'm showing, all of which we found on the internet, that has an image of a ferocious wolf and the words, "It's not a phase, Mum, this is who I really am," is particularly revealing of the agony of experiencing the human condition within. And as I've emphasised, since there's been no truthful understanding of the human condition until now, and so no way of alleviating all the confusion, guilt and shame they were experiencing, adolescents eventually had no choice but to resign themselves to blocking out the subject from their minds, at which point they joined the adult world that, in truth, has been preoccupied avoiding the issue of the human condition in virtually everything they did. So such has been the extent of our fear of the human condition. Basically, growing up under the duress of the unexplained human condition meant living an extremely superficial, escape the issue of the human condition at all cost existence. Just leave the whole unbearably depressing subject completely alone and just get on with trying to manage the symptoms of it. I mean, all the aggression and hatred and wars and unhappiness and suffering and devastation as best we could. So this practice of blocking out from our mind or denying the issue of the human condition is the reason why there's so little awareness now amongst resigned adults of what the human condition really is. They say, oh, I know there's all these hideous problems out there in the world. Oh, I've been talking about them for years. But the human condition is not out there. It's within us. It's been underlying all our thoughts, actions and behaviour. And the truth is that since resigning sometime in your teens, you've spent every waking moment since working out and perfecting how to avoid it, how to work around it, and even try to make it appear as though you're unaffected by it. Everyone smiles and jokes and puts on an incredibly brave face, but underneath it's always there. Hopefully, after what has now been explained about the human condition, resigned adults can see that they have so blocked out the issue of the human condition that it is the real elephant in our living rooms that everyone has long recognised existed but can never allow their minds to actually identify. Even though the issue of the human condition is the one great, outstanding, all-important issue that had to be addressed and solved, it is the one great issue virtually all adults have pretended doesn't even exist. As the great psychoanalyst R.D. Laing has written, the desperately, urgently required project of our time is to explore the inner space and time of consciousness. In other words, explore what our conscious mind really thinks about. We are so out of touch with this realm, in other words, living in such fearful denial of the issue of the human condition, that many people can now argue seriously that it doesn't even exist. It is very small wonder that it is perilous indeed to explore such a lost realm. This extreme fear that resigned adults have of exploring such a lost realm, as Laing referred to it, even though it has finally now been explained and rendered safe to look at, is the subject of my next video and essay, which is number 11, which is titled The Difficulty of Reading About the Human Condition, which Plato predicted, and the solution to that problem. Basically, resigned adults' fear of the human condition has been so great that as soon as discussion of the human condition begins, their mind becomes subconsciously alert to the fact that they are being taken into what has been a completely off-limits realm and consequently starts blocking out what's being said. Their mind finds it difficult taking in or hearing what is being said. In effect, they suffer from a deaf effect to what's being presented. Now, obviously, this problem of the deaf effect blocking access to this life-transforming and world-saving understanding of the human condition is of critical concern, which does mean that the solution to it that is provided in video 11 is very important. As I mentioned earlier, millennials particularly suffer from this problem of the deaf effect, which does mean it is up to pre-millennial generations to discover and initiate support for this breakthrough, all-important understanding of the human condition. So it should be very clear now why finding understanding of the human condition has been described as the holy grail of the whole human journey of conscious thought and inquiry. Only that understanding could end the immense underlying guilt and insecurity that has been causing us to behave in such a defensive, angry, competitive, selfish, destructive, insensitive and cruel way. Well, the renowned Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson has presented the most dishonest of all savage instincts-based excuses for the human condition in the form of his multi-level selection theory in his book, The Social Conquest of Earth, which I'll explain and talk at length about in Freedom Essay 14. Wilson did speak the truth when he wrote in the opening lines of this book, "There is no grail more elusive or precious in the life of the mind than the key to understanding the human condition." So that's the opening sentence. Even though we have practiced living in denial of the issue of the human condition, finding understanding of it has been the key to a psychologically relieved world for humans. I mean, as the sayings go. the truth will set you free, and it finally has. And Carl Jung was also forever pointing out that wholeness for humans depends on the ability to own our own shadow, because he recognised that only the redeeming understanding of our dark, human condition-stricken, upset state could free us from that terrible condition. So this is all why the explanation of our psychologically troubled human condition that I presented in the third video is so incredibly precious and important. When Professor Harry Prosen wrote in his introduction to my book Freedom that I have no doubt this biological explanation of the human condition is the holy grail of insight that we have sought for the psychological rehabilitation of the human race, he was recognising that our species' transformation from a state of horrific psychological insecurity depended on finding understanding of the human condition. Finding understanding of the human condition, which, as I've said, science has finally made possible by discovering the difference in the way genes and nerves work, is the understandoscope that the great Australian cartoonist Michael Leunig was brilliantly intimating we desperately needed in this cartoon. Yes, what an enormous relief it is that we can, at long last, explain and understand that we humans are not in fact monsters, but the glorious heroes of the story of life on Earth. Our ability to finally understand why we destroyed our original Edenic state of cooperative and loving paradise enables the psychological rehabilitation that allows us to return to it. Again, as I mentioned at the end of the fourth video, the poet T.S. Eliot perfectly described this journey from original ignorant innocence to enlightened understanding when he wrote, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So now I encourage you to watch the next video that warns of the difficulty of reading about this historically off-limit subject of the human condition and describes how to overcome that difficulty. I also do want to mention that the transcript of this presentation has an extra 2 sections that aren't included in this video because I want to keep the video as short as possible. Nevertheless, I suggest these extra sections that present the exceptionally honest descriptions of the human condition by Michael Leunig, who's the cartoon, one of his cartoons I just included, and the poet William Blake, are well worth reading in that transcript. So thank you for listening.